In this tutorial, we're going to guide you through how to fill out the breeding scheme spreadsheet. Using a practical example from a Category 1 wheat breeding program, our focus will be on three key sections of the spreadsheet: breeding population, crossing and population structure, and seed material increase. First, we'll explore the breeding population section. This is where you map out the main structure of a breeding scheme. You'll outline each stage of the product development process, the generation of the material at that stage, and the specific breeding methods you're using. Next, we'll move to the crossing and population structure section. Here, we focus on the composition of the breeding population, especially the crossing block. You document the number of parents involved, the mating design, and the number of crosses. As you progress through the generations, this section helps track how the population changes in terms of individuals and crosses maintained in the breeding population. Finally, we'll tackle the seed and material increase section. This part is simpler, focusing on the multiplication stages of your breeding scheme. You fill in details about how the seed or material was increased, the multiplication technology used, and specifics like the experimental unit involved. Let's get started by diving into the breeding population section. The breeding population section is where you outline the key steps of your breeding scheme. You lay out in chronological order the main activities at each stage of the product development process. We'll start with an empty spreadsheet, where all we need initially is an outline of the breeding scheme. If you're unsure about how to prepare an outline of a breeding scheme, please refer to the previous video for guidance. Since we're using a Category 1 breeding scheme, we begin with the crossing block. In the product development stage column, enter crossing and screening. This marks the beginning of the breeding timeline, which is year 1, season 1. In the stage name column, you can use any abbreviation or acronym to represent this stage. I'll use crossing block for this example. Next, the activity column is a checkbox column where you can select multiple activities. In our example, we're only performing crosses, so we'll check crossing. For generation, enter parental, since we are working with parent material. In the derived from column, indicate where the material comes from. In this case, our parents come from the F6 generation of the previous cycle. Since we're only making crosses at this stage, we can leave the breeding method column empty. Now, let's add a new row and move to the next generation in the breeding scheme. We're still in the crossing and screening stage. In this hypothetical example, we can get 2 breeding seasons per year, so we are still in year 1, but in season 2. For the stage name, I'll use F1. In this example of wheat breeding, the F1 generation is a cross between 2 inbred parents. There's no segregation yet, so we're simply selling individuals to increase F2 seeds. For the activity, select Increase. The generation here is F1 and is derived from the parental generation. Since no specific breeding method is applied yet, we leave that column blank. If we continue filling out this section until the F6 stage, we will eventually arrive at the first year trials. As you can see, we've gone through several generations of screening, marker sister selection in F4, genotyping and seed multiplication in F5, and finally field testing in F6. For stages where we bulked seed, like F2 and F3, I added bulk with selection as the breeding method. For F4, where we planted head rows, I used year to row. The spreadsheet allows custom entries for breeding methods, so you're not limited to predefined options. That wraps up the breeding population section. Now let's move on to the crossing and population structure section. In this section, you will describe the composition of the breeding population at each stage. We'll start with the crossing block in the first row. On the number of parents, indicate where the parents in your crossing block come from. In our example, the crossing block has 15 parents, all derived from the F6 generation. The total number of parents is automatically calculated. For the mating design, we'll select random, and for number of crosses, enter 20. For later generations like F1, you only need to fill in the right side columns. For example, in the F1 generation, assume we have 1 individual per cross, and all 20 crosses were successful. The total number of genotypes is then automatically calculated. In the F2 generation, all 20 crosses are maintained, with an average of 200 individuals per cross. In reality, the number of individuals per cross varies for each cross, but you need to choose an average number of individuals per cross that is representative of your breeding program. As we move through F3 and F4, since to advance to these stages we perform selection within families, the 20 crosses are still maintained in both generations, but with half of the individuals culled. By the time we reach F5, selection of individuals within and between families was performed, so some crosses may no longer be represented, and the number of crosses maintained might not be known at this stage. In that case, we focus on tracking the number of individuals instead. That concludes the crossing and population structure section. Let's move on to the seed material increase section. This section is more straightforward. You fill in rows for stages where seed or material multiplication occurs. In our example, we multiply seeds in both the F1 and F5 generations. For the F5 stage, we indicate that individual plants were used for multiplication, and selfing was the technology. The experimental unit was a pot, and we used only one unit. Now let's fill the row for the F5 stage. Here the multiplication unit changes to a line, and we again use selfing as the multiplication technology. If we're using rows, we can add the dimensions of the row and the number of rows used for multiplication. Simple as that. With these 3 sections completed, your breeding scheme spreadsheet is well on its way. In the next video, Christian will cover genotyping, marker-assisted selection, and phenotype screening.